This was the superhero movie that was supposed to save the DCEU? The Flash is out on streaming and stars Michael Keaton, Shannon Callie, Michael Shannon, and no one else. No one else at all. The plot follows superhero The Flash as he breaks the timeline trying to save his mother from an ill fate in yet another adaptation of a comic arc that's about as old as the third Transformers movie. The Flash has been the subject of a lot of rumor, hype, and speculation over the last 3 years. During its production, it was paused, reshot, delayed, shelved, reshot again, and finally released to a resounding The end result is a film that is in no way as interesting as its production history, or even the criminal behavior of its main star. However, before I get into all that, we should probably talk about the movie first. To give a little background, we were first introduced to this version of the Scarlet Speedster in the similarly troubled production Justice League, which, thanks to a Twitter campaign that wore down WB executives, you now have 2 versions of. A throwaway line in The Flash does canonize Snyder's version over Whedon's version, however. Now, Barry Allen is working full-time with the Justice Boys, and Lady, being dispatched by Jeremy Irons' Alfred in a welcome cameo. One of the few welcome cameos in a cameo-filled movie.
And you are welcome.
My ego's far too big to say thank you to someone else.
He's a little frustrated, however, because while Batman is out catching criminals and causing an inappropriate amount of collateral damage and bystander deaths, he's tasked with stopping a hospital from collapsing. He also catches like 14 babies from falling out of a window. Or at least I think these things are supposed to be babies and not the product of some mid-witch cuckoo. They look like 24 Renesmees. Barry is also feeling down because the key piece of evidence that could have exonerated his father turns out to be a big nothing burger. In a move familiar to anyone who's read Flashpoint or watched the CW in the last 10 years, Flash runs so fast, he travels back in time. Traveling back in time, he enters the Speed Force, and oh god, what the hell is that? What is going on? What is happening on the screen right now? What is wrong with the screen right now? What is guys, what is happening to the screen right now? What is on the screen? Not only did Barry travel back in time, he also sent the film CGI back in time to 2003. Not since Tron Legacy have I seen such unearned confidence in CGI faces that built a cabin in the uncanny valley. Everyone looks about as plastic and rubbery as the fucking Scorpion King. Before I move on, let's talk a bit more about the CGI. I understand that The Flash was made in a rather unusual atmosphere when it comes to the visual effects industry. COVID shut down so many effects houses and forced major films to undergo post-production on work-from-home systems that were far less powerful. Effects houses have also been crushed under the boot heel of Disney and other horribly demanding studios that have been underpaying them for years. This has left many talented special effects wizards burnt out and caused many more to just leave the industry entirely. It's an interesting time for CGI because studios have broken what they used to rely on so heavily. CGI looks markedly worse than it did even 5 years ago. I think The Flash is one of the last of its kind. A movie that relies on heavy CGI and very little practical work. The Chrono Bowl, as it's named later in the film, is, as far as I know, an invention of this movie. So it's not like it's trying to faithfully recreate something from the comic. It would have been the easiest thing in the world to have scaled back on. After all, time travel has been depicted hundreds of ways over the years. The 2002 adaptation of The Time Machine, which is also not a good movie, managed something far more interesting and believable over 20 years ago. I don't want to spend the whole review just complaining about the Chrono Bowl, but it is featured incredibly heavily throughout the film, including at the movie's climax. Anyway, Barry successfully saves his mom's life with a well-placed can of spaghetti sauce. However, when he returns to the present, he finds everything has changed drastically. There is a far more aloof version of himself running around. The Justice League doesn't exist, and it's 2012 and he's found himself in the middle of the plot of Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. A fate worse than death. Yeah, it doesn't help that this movie is trying to get you nostalgic for the worst Superman film ever made. And yes, I am including the quest for peace. Now Barry and other Barry have to figure out how to stop Zod by poorly adapting several scenes from Flashpoint. Eventually he meets up with Keaton's Batman, now very retired, and together they all recruit Supergirl. Eventually everyone fights in a desert. I feel like this movie has some good ideas, but nothing that hasn't already been explored in other works involving the Flash. It's hard to believe that the CW could give us a version of this story that was far more engaging and memorable. The movie also misses several things that made Flashpoint so engaging in the first place. The original comic arc had Barry entering a world that was more than just slightly different than his own. Comic Barry had to deal with a world where Aquaman was waging war on the surface, and everything was falling apart. Batman was Thomas Wayne, having become Batman after his son Bruce was shot in the robbery that once took his life. This led to the comic's best moment when Barry is able to give a letter to Bruce from his alternate world father, giving the two a connection across time and dimensions. They set this arc up in the film, with Affleck's Bruce Wayne lamenting his lonely life. Does that end up mattering in this universe? Hell no. Instead, you get an ending joke that raises more questions that we all know will go unanswered. And that's another problem with this movie. Nothing matters, both in a narrative and a meta sense. It's no secret that this version of the DCEU is all but dead. With James Gunn taking control of DC's film output, he's quick to cut off this continuity in favor of a fresh start. This means that it's very unlikely that any plot point brought up at the end of this movie will ever be resolved. If you liked either version of Barry Allen seen here, well, good luck seeing them again. I don't think WB is keen to put Ezra Miller in top billing ever again. What about Keaton's Batman? I have to admit I got a little thrill seeing the classic and best Batmobile, and watching Keaton do a full head swing to look around like he was back in 1989. However, it's left nebulous if he's even alive at the end of the film. He was supposed to follow up this film as Barbara Gordon's mentor in Batgirl, but that movie was shelved in a high-profile cancellation. I really don't get how that movie could have been any worse than this one, but I guess it did star a woman of color and have Muslim directors. Racist! I'm saying he's racist. These characters also don't matter in universe. We know that Barry will eventually decide to reset time and let his mom die. So every decision is just biding time till that happens. There are other elements of this movie that I hated, but talking about them would give away huge spoilers. I guess you'll have to find out for yourself. However, I will say that if this is the end of the DCEU, it's a pretty sad and underwhelming end. I was never a fan of this version of the DC universe anyway, but it does represent a massive amount of wasted potential. Despite their real-life behavior, Ezra Miller is rather good as Barry Allen, and they flex some real acting muscle in this movie with two very distinct versions. It also seems like the universe was finally getting to a place where it could explore some of the silliness of the DC canon, which has been used to great effect in shows like Brave and the Bold or HBO Max's Harley Quinn. The Flash, however, is too little, too late. The Flash gets a 1 out of 5. Now that it's drawing to a close, I might take a look back at the DCEU as a whole. It's been 15 movies, including the upcoming Aquaman sequel, and overall I think maybe 3 have been good. While we have had to suffer through sadness generators like Suicide Squad and BVS, we also got some fun ones like the first Shazam and Wonder Woman. While most are crap, I will say that the DCEU does contain one of my favorite superhero films, and perhaps the only great movie to come out of this entire mess. It's a movie with a perfect tone, masterclass acting, a great ensemble cast, and the best villain in the entirety of the DCEU, and perhaps DC movies as a whole. And it's the subject of my next review. That's right, crew members, I'm gonna talk about Birds of Prey. Whoa, I just felt the whole internet radiate with anger.
I love this chick. She's got rage issues.
I don't have rage issues!
Until then, crew members, stay safe and be who you are.